welcome to episode 1 of a 4-part series, Your Tenancy During COVID and Beyond. If anyone told you this time last year we're going to be dealing with a pandemic, no one would believe them, but this is what we're dealing with. And we want to be able to explore during these series the pressures that Queenslanders are facing, give you some clear information and practical tips on how you can survive your tenancy. So the first episode is dealing with the temporary changes in the residential law. So to do that, I am joined by Sam Gaylor. Sam Gaylor is the Manager of Customer Experience at the Residential Tenancies Authority, or as you would know, the RTA. He overlooks the contact centre as well as the dispute resolution team. He's been working with the RTA for 7 years. He's a trained conciliator and has extensive experience working with people with disabilities and challenging behaviours, which is why he's talking to me today. So, hi Sam.
Good morning, Abby.
Can you tell us, what does the RTA do? What is it?
Sure. So the RTA administers the residential renting laws for Queensland. So we cover general tenancies, rooming accommodation, caravans and social housing. The RTA also holds all of the rental bonds for the state of Queensland. So if a bond is taken as part of the rental agreement, it has to be lodged with the RTA. We also provide information and education, as well as dispute resolution, as you mentioned. The RTA also has an investigations team who can investigate any potential offences under the legislation.
So I think we've all seen headlines that tenants can't get evicted through everything that's going on, through COVID-19, no one can get evicted. Is that true?
No, that's not correct. Although appreciate, yes, we've all been seeing the headlines as well, and for us at the RTA, there's been times where we've looked at the same questions.
Yes.
Ultimately, there are protections of the National Cabinet introduced a moratorium on evictions for people who are impacted by COVID-19 who can't pay their rent. Since that announcement, so we've had a number of announcements, but since that, tenants and owners or property managers have been encouraged to talk to each other, try and reach agreement, negotiate agreement, but there's never been a moratorium on paying rent.
Right. So the laws have changed though?
The laws have changed, but it's really important that if tenants have not been impacted by COVID-19 significantly, that they continue to pay their rent as per their agreement.
And when you say that, what do you mean by affected? Because I think we've all been affected by COVID-19. No one's enjoying it, but what do you mean by if they have been affected for tenants?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. The impacted by COVID-19 is set out in the regulations, so there are some requirements around that. Temporary amendments were brought in to the Queensland laws, as you mentioned. I'm going to use my notes here.
No, go for it, because they're quite specific, aren't they? And I guess that's what the changes.
There's certain points that I need to obviously make, but one of them is that the name of the regulations is the Residential Tenancies and Rooming Accommodation COVID-19 Emergency Response Regulation 2020.
You can read that, that's allowed.
Hence why I'm using my notes.
Yeah.
The regulations are valid until 2020, but when we talk about impacted from a rent perspective, it's where a tenant can establish that they have lost income. So 25% or more of their income they've lost, or that their rent is now 30% or more of their total household income, if that makes sense.
Okay, so if it is a bit confusing, let's just say I have lost my job.
Yep.
The company that I worked for is shut down during COVID. I haven't been able to pay my rent for 2 weeks. Can I get evicted?
Okay, so the new laws give you protection on that. But it's very important to communicate with your agent or your landlord. So yes, there are protections, but you need to be having that clear communication. The RTA has a template letter if you feel that you need some support, so you can use that to see the kind of interactions that you can have with your property manager or with the landlord. You're also looking to collect documents, so it might be an email or a letter from your employer. Again, it's demonstrating that income loss of 25% or more, or that the rental is now 30% or more of your household income. explaining the situation, you may be able to agree with them on a rent reduction. If you do reach an agreement on that, then it needs to be in writing. There's a variation agreement that's been created with the RTA. It's on our website that people can then use to have the agreement clearly set out in writing, and should include in that if there's any, it might be that you're going to make repayments once you start working again, or you might negotiate that you'll start paying rent from a certain point. These things need to be clearly documented in the variation agreement. So they need to be put in writing so that everyone is clear on rights and responsibilities.
What about if I haven't told my landlord or the real estate agent that I've lost my job?
As soon as this finishes, you need to go and tell them.
Okay, sure.
So
because I think there's been a lot of people that are just going through a difficult time, and maybe they haven't got around to it. Maybe they are too scared by it. They don't want to be evicted.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it really is about communication, and it is that people are reluctant. It's a very stressful time. We understand that. I think everyone understands that. But if you don't tell the landlord or the agent that you're affected in this way, they're not going to know. The process that would then be available to them, if they have no knowledge, they should be then issuing you with what's called a notice to show cause. Now that's newly come in from the regulations, and it gives the tenant 14 days to respond. Ultimately, it's looking for proof that you've been affected. So it's an extra level of protection and communication. But if the tenant didn't respond, so if you don't respond to that, you don't either pay your rent in full or respond to let them know that you have been impacted, then you're opening yourself up to the potential of a breach notice and then potentially moving towards a notice to leave if you don't pay your rent.
So I can get evicted for not paying rent and not contacting them or giving evidence?
Yeah, so if you can't, you can't demonstrate that you've been significantly impacted by COVID-19, or if you just ignore it, then yes, the normal processes can apply as per the usual legislation.
Sam, what about if I have lost my job or I have had a major reduction in rent? I have contacted my real estate agent or landlord. I've tried to give them evidence as well. They don't believe me.
Yep.
Or maybe they don't want to give me a rent reduction. What can I do then?
Sure. So there are obviously competing priorities. An agent is working on behalf of the owner. The owner has their own bills to pay. So we understand that there are going to be situations where people can't agree. Dispute resolution process through the RTA is mandatory for issues to do with rent arrears for COVID-19, as well as there are other, key issues around entry and around ending tenancy, but dispute resolution with the RTA would be the way to go. There is eligibility criteria on that, so we need to, as the RTA will prioritise COVID disputes. Best way to see whether you're eligible for that is to apply through web services on the RTA's website. There's an eligibility assessment tool there, rolls off the tongue. You can go through that, but even if it's not a dispute that's related to COVID, you can still submit the dispute resolution request through to us. It would just be an awareness that we are prioritising COVID-19 disputes. And if you can't access it through the website, then it's finding the 16A form to send to us directly.
I did hear you say that there has been a lot of forms submitted, so obviously it is going to take some time, but what happens once I lodge a dispute?
Sure. And look, the time is a real focus for the RTA, particularly with the COVID dispute. So the process, once the RTA receives the dispute, we will notify the party that we've received it within 24 hours. So you at least then get the reassurance that, okay, they've got the form. From that, we then endeavour to contact the person who submitted the dispute within 2 business days. So that's an RTA conciliator, so someone who's trained in the legislation and also trained with disputes to be able to talk through the situation. And then there's a range of options available. So they will, in most cases, contact the other party and we'll try and facilitate agreement between the parties. If we can facilitate that agreement, if we can get parties to understand where the other party is coming from, that's obviously our ideal, and I think it's the ideal for most people. If that happens, then the agreement gets put in writing, or it can be put in a variation agreement. If it can't be resolved, so if they just can't agree, they can't reach that understanding, mutual understanding, then the RTA issues a notice of unresolved dispute, which goes to the disputing party. That's for them to then take the matter further to Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal, so QCAT, for them to make a ruling, essentially.
Sam, what about if I am trying to pay rent, but the isolation is just, I'm finding it too hard? I want to move in with family or friends, or maybe my parents who do my washing, I don't know. But my lease doesn't finish for another 5 months.
Sure.
Is there anything that the temporary laws can help me with?
So there is part of the regulation which talks about excessive hardship.
Yep.
Excessive hardship is always part of the legislation, but with COVID-19, there's particular criteria that may be able to assist. So if you've lost 75% of your income and you have less than $5,000 in savings, and you can prove that, you've got documents to prove that, you can give a minimum of 14 days notice to end the agreement.
Right.
Now, you could already give that 14 days notice to end the agreement under the current legislation, but with the regulations, if you can prove those criteria, then your break lease fees, essentially the costs that you would be liable for, can be capped at the equivalent of 1 week's rent.
Yep.
If the owner or the agent doesn't agree that you meet the criteria for excessive hardship based on that, then you can apply for dispute resolution with the RTA.
Yeah, right, in the same way. Can you tell me, for people that are experiencing domestic violence, what sort of protections are in place to maybe help them out?
Yeah, so domestic violence is obviously a very difficult situation, and the government recognises that, particularly with the isolation and the restrictions, that people in those situations are especially vulnerable. So there have been changes brought into the legislation on that. One is that the tenant experiencing domestic violence can end their interest in their residential tenancy agreement. They need to give the landlord or the agent 7 days notice. So they give a document that basically says, I'm leaving, you've got 7 days. It's supported by a range of documents, so it might be a protection order or a notice from a social worker. There's a particular form on the RTA website which details what can be used as supporting information. Now, because they've given that 7 days notice to leave, it doesn't mean they have to stay in the property.
Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously it's not a situation that anyone wants to prolong. So they give the notice and then they can leave. But if they're meeting these criteria, break lease fees would be capped at 1 week's rent. The tenant can request their bond contribution back, and if they're staying in the property, they can change the locks to, and this is a new thing that's come in with the regulations, they can change the locks to the rental property without consent, as long as they give copies of keys or codes to the landlord or agent as soon as possible. And if people need help or support for domestic family violence, there are many support organisations available.
So if you have been affected by COVID-19, you can go to the RTA website. There's a lot of resources there. I believe a lot of webinars that you can do as well, and maybe even links to organisations that might be able to help you out as well.
Absolutely. So the RTA website is the first port of call, and if you need specific discussion on your particular situation, you're not sure whether it meets requirements, most welcome to call our contact centre. We are busy, but we're there to help.
There to help. Absolutely. So if you have been affected by COVID-19, especially financially, please contact them for more information. And if you haven't been affected by COVID-19, you do have to remember that you are under the obligation to reach all your tenancy requirements as well. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you, Abby.
And I hope that you will join us tomorrow as we talk about effective communication, how to have an open communication with your landlord or your real estate agent. If you are going through a hard time in your tenancy, you can find information and support through the COVID-19 Residential Hub at covid19.qld.gov.au the hub. You can contact the RTA by visiting rta.qld.gov.au, phone 1300 366 311 or SMS HI to 0480 000 782. You can find more helpful contacts at tenancyskills.com.au/COVID support.